Well, hello everyone. Today is April the 7th, 2025, and this is Wes Fryer facilitating our monthly Media Ed Club webinar on the topic of fact-checking previously invisible history. And I am so excited and thankful to have some special guest panelists with us today. And so what I'd like to do to kind of get us started is encourage you to continue to check in on chat if you want to share anything about your current situation, but you can also share anything that you might know about the history of racial terror lynchings in America, which is our topic today. Also, we're going to have a few announcements, and then I'll introduce Krista and Helen, and then we're planning to really just have this conversation together. This obviously is a challenging and a difficult conversation in many respects. And we have the option to do some breakout rooms, and normally that is our procedure for these, is to have 20 or so minute time of sharing openly where it's recorded and then go to breakout rooms. We still may want to do that, but the opportunity to hear directly from Krista and Helen is really special. And so let's just kind of see how this goes. But if we do breakout rooms, we will not record those. So in terms of announcements, I want to encourage you to use our shared notes. So we have a shared notes document, and what we typically do during the actual webinar is we'll allow folks to edit this. And so you can go to that link. I'm going to drop that link into the chat. And if you would like to add to our notes, we've got our links to the slides. You can get to those, the video that we hope you saw in advance, but if you didn't, that's okay. You can still see it, but all media that extends the learning that we're doing today. But please go ahead and feel free to add to those notes. You can put in questions. It's an opportunity for us to just continue to collaborate and learn. We want to let you know about 4 upcoming events for the Media Education Lab. Tomorrow, we're going to have a webinar on teacher perspectives on media literacy. Then on April 12th, critical thinking for an AI world. On April 23rd, digital literacy and fandom culture. And then in May, privacy literacy slaying the literacy hydra. But we also have our next Media Ed Club topic, and it's going to be Yuval Noah Harari's book, Nexus, A Brief History of Information Networks from the Stone Age to AI. And Ralph, who's at the University of Oklahoma, had talked to me about this and suggested this, I think, back in January. And so we're finally going to do this, and it's a book study. And so there are some links to some podcasts, some videos, some articles. Of course, if you're able and want to read the book before next month, that would even be better. But you don't have to have read the whole book. An opportunity for us to talk about the book and some really important issues surrounding artificial intelligence. So we want to encourage you to visit the link at happenedhereclt.com. We have a number of links for this project and this initiative on the Media Education Lab's website, but that's really the homepage that Krista and Helen are going to talk the most about. And in addition, we want to encourage you to visit the Equal Justice Initiative's website. They have a page about lynching in America, confronting the legacy of racial terror, and a lot of information about their work related to this project that we're talking about here in Charlotte, North Carolina, but also elsewhere. So I want to go ahead and introduce you to Helen Schwab and Krista Terrell. I had an opportunity to hear their presentation at St. Peter's Episcopal Church here in Charlotte several months ago. I had learned about this through our church in Charlotte sometime in 2024, but the media literacy connection to this, there's a bunch of them. But as Helen talked about this idea of vetting all of these stories and bringing this history to light, I just thought, as media literacy educators and working online on the web, there's so much that we try to do and work with students on when it comes to vetting information and verifying sources. And so today's topic is, of course, not only important from an educational and media literacy standpoint. I think it's important because it's history that many of us have not learned, haven't studied. It's been hidden, and I think it's so important to uncover that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share so we can see each other's faces a little bit, but encourage you, if you want to, again, to put questions into the chat. And let me turn it over to Helen first to introduce, and then Krista, and then we'll jump into questions. Thank you all so much for taking time to be with us today. I'm excited that we've got a great group of 20 of us here gathered online.
We are so honored to be here, Wes. I'm going to actually kick it right to Krista Terrell to introduce the project because she does such a great overview, and then I can come back and talk about my role in it.
Okay,
Thank
sounds
you.
great.
Well, thank you, Wes, for the opportunity for us to be with you and to share. So across the country, remembrance projects like ours seek to tell the truth about racial terror lynchings in America, person by person, story by story, and name by name. And the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Remembrance Project theme here locally is called It Happened Here. So here in 1913, Joe McNeely was stripped from his bed at the Good Samaritan Hospital and after altercation with police and shot to death. And here in 1929, Mr. Willie McDaniel was found dead by a little black girl a day after arguing with his white landlord in order to be paid for work that he and his wife had done. So in one of the videos, you'll see in one of the links that was shared a video by Brian Stevenson with the Equal Justice Initiative on why memorials are important and why now. So I won't play that, but that is a link for you all to share. But here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we are here to honor Mr. Joe McNeely and Mr. Willie McDaniel through soil collection, as well as the erection of a historical marker, both at the sites where the lynchings took place. Also, community conversations is a key element of this project, as well as doing a racial justice essay contest. We are very proud to have the city of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and Tepper Sports and Entertainment as part of this project and supporting this work, because Mr. Willie McDaniel was lynched at the farm of Mel Greer, which is now Reedy Creek Park and Nature Preserve, which is part of Mecklenburg County. And Mr. Joe McNeely was lynched at the Good Samaritan Hospital, which was the Black hospital here in Charlotte, which is now home to the Carolina Panthers and the MLS football team, which is also Bank of America Stadium. So very grateful to have their support. There is a website, as Wes mentioned, that has a wonderful array of resources, including community conversations and the powerful 7-minute film, where Hannah Hassan was commissioned to do work to really tell the stories of these two men. And she really reimagines what their lives would be like when they were here with us. So, and also there's a personal story essay that I wrote when I learned about some family members that were targeted to be lynched as well. So thank you again for the opportunity to share. I look forward to getting into the information, and I will toss it over to Helen.
Okay. Thanks, Krista. I am a lifelong journalist, worked about 37 years for the Charlotte Observer here in Charlotte, did a lot of different jobs, but what drew me to this project when we were invited to help was I had retired, and the more I realized, I had retired in 2019, which had begun the decline of media resources, and audience had already begun. And my husband and I both had been at the Observer for a long time, and we're really thinking about, so how do we tell stories? How do we get to stories that aren't talked about? And schools and churches and other venues are more and more the places where we're going to need to tell this history. Media credibility issues and media audience issues are not going to go away. I do have faith that it will come back. Credible storytellers are everywhere. We've got to teach kids to know the difference between credible and not credible. And part of this history really digs into what I think you as educators would be really drawn to, is digs into critical thinking for kids of all ages. What is credible? What is true? Who tells these stories? and what version are you reading, and how can you assess its credibility? So I think that is much of what we were doing in telling this story. And I think Wes is so wise to see that this is really about literacy. This is really about media. This is really about education. All of these things are so crucial, and you are all in position to really make a difference on how we understand history, how we look at history, how we interrogate its sources. And that's what we tried to do in this project. So we were initially invited in to create content. And one of Wes's questions pre this was, how has your role changed? I think as we thought about it, as we talked to Krista, who's in charge of this aspect of the project, we realized that we need Black voices to tell this story. We need to pay them for doing this work that we are asking them to do. And we need to simultaneously do deep, deep research, not surface research, into what happened in both these times. And in that case, because my husband and I were both journalists, longtime journalists, both retired, we'd be free. We thought we can take that part of the deep, deep research, which would be expensive. We commissioned artists to create the video, to create Hannah Hassan, as Krista has mentioned, to create spoken word poetry, because the other thing we were really thoughtful about is, how do you reach audiences in different ways? So video, we recorded those audio, those spoken word. She created spoken word poetry, which is a different form of storytelling, right? So we wanted to really think about all those layers. There is text of the poems, but there is also audio. They are also incorporated into this film. We wanted Brian Stevenson on that website. It is a 1.5-minute video. If you watch nothing else, please watch his video, which speaks eloquently to why we need to look at this history now. Wes has put that in several links in the chat if you're looking. If you just dial around on the website, it's deep and rich, and there's lots of stuff there. But I want to get to your content questions, so I don't want to go too far afield. Wes, I'll trust you to guide us.
It's okay. I just, wow, what an emotional presentation. I love how, you've brought in the multiple modalities, and the multiple voices and the art. Gus has commented, uh, wherever we happen to live, I think that we live in communities that have been touched by these kinds of issues. And it just strikes me as so vitally important that we find ways to have these conversations, because these are not conversations that everybody is encouraging and that are authorized, and it can even be dangerous. But I want to, I guess, just applaud you, and also just the way in which media and video can be so powerful to not put us in somebody's shoes and complete. I've had people talk about, there's limitations with empathy, but it does really potentially touch our hearts and our minds in a way that simply an article or a timeline of dates can't. So could you all speak a little bit to that? And we'll certainly jump into those questions, because we had shared those in advance, and I know you've got some great answers. But what about the way in which media and the different modalities, from the poetry to the stories, to the physical markers in place? We probably need to talk definitely about that aspect.
Well, I'll say for me, I've had a career in the arts for 20 something years, and I knew that I wanted the arts to play a role in this project. And just commissioning Hannah Hassan to do that work. I mean, at first I was just saying, can you commission you something about the project? She took it to a whole nother level by creating a story or poetry around each of the men, as well as the entire project. And again, she reimagines what their lives would have been like, and she really humanizes them. These were humans. These were members of our community, and the fact that you have it in these different mediums, in audio, but also the video is extremely powerful and really grounds people in what this project is about and why we're doing this work. So I think from the videos to the audio to the wonderful work that Helen and Gary Schwab have done by really digging deep into what happened and pulling out the truth and facts and the nuances is very critical and really elevates this project and again memorializes the two men. Helen.
Yeah, I think as we talked about the video, we hired filmmaking group of young Black men in Charlotte. So we are really intentional about who are we asking to do this work. Really intentional about compensating them again for the work. And I know for as educators that is difficult. I think when you engage artists in classrooms, you want to think about, how are you thinking about what you're asking them to do, right? So racial terror is traumatizing. We've got to talk about that. So I think that's worth just mentioning because I know you will be thinking about it and using these ideas differently. I think to say clearly, there are no images of lynchings in any of the work on the website. So if anyone has hesitated to watch something for that reason, there are no images of lynching. It is emotional. It is powerful. There are descriptions. They're not grisly descriptions. I think that's fair to say. Krista, would you agree that there are some descriptions, but we were intentional about that. We want this to be widely shareable. We want people talking about this. We want people able to look at it, be moved, certainly, but not re-traumatized. Uh, I think the video, we were very specific in thinking this will be the thing that we show before community conversations. This will be something that summarizes in a way that touches people that they can then take a minute to process, but then be ready and have some ideas on what they want to talk about in this. And I think used in that way, it can be a spark for classroom conversation. It can be a spark for community conversation. It can be a spark for educational conversation because there are so many entry points. There are so many things that will strike different people differently. And I think that was another thing that the modality differences do for us. When Hannah's longer pieces, she did longer pieces on each, she gives these men their lives back. She makes them not just victims. She describes them as, after intensive interviewing of us, after we've done the research. I mean, Hannah aligned this with journalism and really thinks about this, and I could say academic research. She gives it a different voice, an engaging voice, and she does it very clearly. She says, I imagine him talking with his wife. She's not saying she was there. She's not saying she knows what happens. She's saying, which is journalistically, academically, has integrity. She's not saying she knows. She's saying he was a little brother. Joe McNeely was a little brother. We know he was a little brother, but saying that feels different, right? And can touch people differently. I think that's her genius and the filmmaker's genius as well. In we excerpted them, and then they used some historical footage. Really, really amazing work. Highly recommend. And I can imagine students really supervised, right? Because you want it to have integrity. In this case, and we had talked about, is there an art component to this? Do we invite artists to respond to this work? And that is certainly another way to go. And I can imagine educators doing something like that. For this, we wanted it to have academic, journalistic integrity tied to, truthful. So it is truthful to say, I can imagine someone like this. We would not allow the venturing into declaring them that unless it was provable, if that makes sense.
Well, it occurs to me that, professional development around this, providing some opportunities for not only classroom teachers, but community volunteers. I put the link to the Host a Conversation resource page that's under Engage on the website, and we'll talk more about that. But this isn't something not only that many of us learned about in school, but many of us have not necessarily tackled these topics as a facilitator, teacher, leader. And so I think there are just a lot of those aspects aspects that are very important. But I think, the encouragement to be involved, to have dialogue, and to utilize these resources. And like you said, that video is a real good anchor and catalyst for situating the conversation. But I feel like this is really an empowering project that is empowering not only folks here in Charlotte, but because it's, tied to the equal because of the nature of this topic. It is just something that relates to everyone. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of markers. I was at a middle school conference here in Charlotte 2 weeks ago, and a teacher from Wilmington presented, and it was about invisible history. And she was reflecting on how, she didn't learn about the massacre in Wilmington until she was in her mid-20s and she went to college. It wasn't something that was studied. It wasn't something that was visible in the community. So, Krista, can you talk a little bit about why it's important to have markers and maybe what the status is of those markers here in Charlotte for our project?
Sure. Well, the importance of having historical markers for this project is to memorialize Mr. McNeely and Mr. McDaniel. Is for people to know about the truth of what happened here. On one side of the marker tells the story of what happened to Mr. Joe McNeely and Mr. McDaniel on each of their markers. And on the back provides really historical context of what life was like or at the time of when kind of the history help me, Helen, help with the history of race relations and things at the time.
The context, yes, yes.
Provides that context. Thank you. And so one from Mr. McNeely and one from Mr. McDaniel, but it's important for them to be erected because people need to know this history. This is a history that is not shared. I really didn't learn even deep stuff about Black history until I went to college, went to Johnson C. Smith and learned about John Hope Franklin and read his books and things like that. So it's important to erect those markers so that people will always know about Mr. Joe McNeely and Mr. Willie McDaniel. And again, on the other side, provide context to that. We do have a marker for Mr. McNeely, which is we're waiting for because the Panther Stadium is being renovated. We're in talks with them to have a temporary installation of the marker while they're doing construction because we know the stadium will be open during that time. So waiting on a timeline for that. For Mr. McDaniel, working with Mecklenburg County, it is our hope that we will be able to erect that marker this year, hopefully in the late spring going into the fall.
And that marker will be outside Panther Stadium, although the actual physical location, I think, as the video says, is at one of the end zones of the stadium. Is that correct or not?
It's just outside the bowl. So if you think of the grass or the artificial turf now, as the bowl, it is just outside of that. So it is within the stadium proper. This marker will be on the stadium grounds. You couldn't place a marker where it happened because there's building there. So this will be proximate, as Brian Stevenson is fond of saying. Proximate is crucial.
But it also, I'm sorry, real quick, it also goes to reporting that has been done that says like the 20-yard line, that after doing more research, that is not correct. So we're really also trying to correct some things that have been reported.
Yep.
So I'm going to go to that question we did in advance, Krista, before we leave the markers. The soil collection, in addition to the markers, are very symbolic. Can you speak a little bit to the emotional and communal impact of the ceremonies that have taken place and their role in the healing process for this project?
Yes, so we were very fortunate to have the soil collection for Mr. Joe McNeely in May of 2021 as the Panthers were lifting up the turf of the field, so there was dirt there. Very emotional experience because it was very intimate. We had young Black men from the Males Place there. They were doing the soil collection. They did a libation. And it was really, it was for me and for many others, it wasn't a time of sadness. It was really a time of joy because Mr. McNeely was finally being acknowledged. His life was being acknowledged and also memorialized, and knowing that this soil will go to the Legacy Museum and be displayed along with other jars of soil that reflect that memorialize victims that were part of racial terror lynching. It was it was it was a very beautiful and um, solemn experience to honor his life, and that's why I'm very grateful that EJI has the soil collection and the historical marker as core components of remembrance projects.
What was the genesis of this? When did someone from Charlotte visit the, you know, how
How did it happen?
what was the genesis?
Yes, so Kate Flynn, who's the project manager, in 2018 went to the opening of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice down in Montgomery, Alabama, and learned about Mr. Joe McNeely and Mr. Willie McDaniel because at the memorial there are markers of counties where there have been documented racial terror lynchings. I do want to say we know that there are many more racial terror lynchings that took place, but what EJI has done through their process, we know that there are two that were documented here. And when she was there, that's when she learned about community remembrance projects that EJI was starting to do across the country, and really was the leader to say, hey, we really need to do that here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and started bringing nonprofit organizations and people together. So that's how I became involved. And also organizations in Charlotte were doing bus trips to Montgomery, Alabama for the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial. So that's how the Remembrance Project came to be.
I'm going to drop a link in to a related site called Historic Brattonsville. It is located in York County, just south of us in Charlotte, and actually weekend before last, they had the public opening of an ancestral cemetery for the formerly enslaved. But they have some very, again, academically rigorous research and documentation about the lynching of Mr. Williams. And I want to recommend that as well. It's just not that common, I think, that we find these kinds of memorials, but also opportunities to intersect with this history. And I think there really is something so powerful about not just having it in a book, but having things in the community that we see that, that are catalysts for those conversations.
And I'll also just add, at the memorial, Hannah Hassan was there and performed the poem that she wrote for Mr. McNeely. So that was another element, again, that was very touching as we memorialized him through the soil collection.
Absolutely. Well, Helen, I want to ask you about fact checking. So, fact checking historical events, especially events like we're talking about that have been deliberately erased or ignored, can be very challenging. Can you talk a little bit about any of the obstacles that you and the team encountered in uncovering these histories? How have you addressed these, and what have you learned? And I guess out of a career in journalism, you drew on those things, but today's media environment is a little bit different than it was 20 years ago. So can you speak to some of that?
Yeah. I think the main obstacle, the most obvious obstacle in any of this kind of work is that 99.9%, and that is not an accurate percentage, although it might be, of our recorded history in America is written by white people for white people. So when you think about a really specific singular viewpoint, and again, I'm careful in my language here because in talking about this, the current flip out about DEI does not make this untrue. Anytime you look at history through a single viewpoint, it's flawed. Period. End of subject. That has nothing to do with DEI. That is just a truth. So when you think about what recorded history is in this country, it was not only by white people for white people, it was by wealthier white people, more educated people who had access to education, people for those same people. So that is not going to be accurate history. And the sooner we reckon with that, the better. So what do you do with that? Lots of things. There's so many things you can do. Teach Zen. Gus says, yeah, teach Howard Zen for one thing. Another thing you can do is look for any resources that aren't, right? So there are African American newspapers of the time, and I'll speak more about the Black history resources that we had. So you look for those, which brings up another failure of our hopes, which is that many Black newspapers are insufficiently archived or weren't archived at all. And the archives that do exist are sometimes hard to get to, harder to get to than white archives. So it's not just that you have to think about it, then you also have to procure it. NC Live gives you some access, but there are papers that just never really got archived. The Charlotte Post here in Charlotte does not have a really solid archive of their earliest stuff. AME Zion's newspaper, which was publishing at the time that both these things happened, doesn't have a full archive. Star of Zion is the name of that paper. They were weeklies, which is tragic. So you look for them being quoted. You look for them talking, you look, because papers will sometimes do 20 years ago today, you look for those. You look for mentions in other stories. So you're looking for other voices contemporaneous to what you're doing, right? And anybody who has any questions in the middle of this, jump out. For me in that work, universities sometimes have access. You as academic folks will have better access than a lot of people through, I think,
Library
opportunities you have.
licenses and relationships that sometimes they have.
Yeah, library systems, sometimes you can get access, but other libraries, New York Public Library gave me a free month to rifle through their stuff online because they understood the work I was doing. Universities that do have access to it are sometimes willing to share. We'll send you stuff if you're looking for it. So those are opportunities. So newspapers we know are great resources for history. What else could be? And I'll get to more about the newspapers. Think about what else could be: deeds, wills, court records, other genealogical stuff, census information, medical records or death certificates, birth certificates, all the kind of genealogical stuff, things that you find in Ancestry. Some places like Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Library will let you do that work on site, even if you're not a member of Ancestry, so you can get to that. Let's talk about newspapers for a bit. Be thoughtful as you look at newspapers. How many accounts contemporaneous can you get? And compare and contrast those. On the first racial terror lynching, and let me just pause because we always do this. So lynching, people often thinks just means hanging. It means any extrajudicial killing of a person. So anybody that didn't get due process, that a bunch of people just decided to kill, that's a lynching. People were shot, people were an assortment of horrific ways to be killed. That was done. Mr. McNeely was shot to death. Mr. McDaniel was found with a broken neck. There is not clarity about exactly how that was done. So lynching can be any form of death. Racial terror lynching is specific, meaning it was to terrify the Black community. So it wasn't just a lynching. There were white people lynched, and sometimes you'll get that. Well, white people were lynched too. Racial terror lynching was to frighten the Black community. So that is why we're really specific about saying those words for anybody who wondered about that. So you're looking for multiple accounts of the history, multiple accounts at that time of the history, and comparing and contrasting, because people who sent reporters or who relied on different versions that'll show up in the stories, and you can look at that and think about that. Think critically about every source. What did this newspaper have going on at the time? Depending on the time that you're researching, some newspapers were aligned specifically with a political party, and you need to say that. If that's what you're looking at, you need to
Identifying bias, identifying who the audience was, who was the speaker, all those kinds of things we talk about in literacy education.
Exactly. And so you can do pieces of this work as an educator. You can decide, okay, we're not going to go into a whole specific digging into a crime, but let's look at the newspapers in your city, in Charlotte or wherever. Let's look at what newspapers were available, and let's look at how they covered different things, and just talk about that, because that's informing your students that there are lots of ways that this history was recorded, and let's look at and let's interrogate Why does this event look so different in these two? So there are ways to get at what this project does without going full bore into a particular thing. Of course, we'd love you to do that, but if you feel that right now you can't, or if you want to build toward that, these are ways to start. Okay, think critically about each story. What are the questions that you would have about this story? And are the answers to that question in the story? That could mean the reporter never asked. That could mean they did ask and they didn't get an answer. That could mean that it never occurred to anybody, or it was just a given that that question was not going to be asked. Why is no one of Willie McDaniel's family ever interviewed for anything here? No one did that then. Do you notice that there are no Black people quoted in any of these stories? Why do you think that is? Those are discussion points that don't have to be that are compelling.
So it occurs to me that creating and sharing some of those lesson plans with links to some of those resources might be a follow-up that the educator community and just others in the community could help with, because as media literacy educators, we're familiar with finding our lessons in different places, and having some primary sources. It's of course also work that could be done by university, students or researchers, but having that lesson plan, here's the link to the primary source, here's suggested discussion questions, that might be a fantastic way to additionally engage, but also save some time on the front end in terms of just locating the primary resources to.
Well, if somebody has an idea and would like to collaborate on some lesson plans, I'm over here at helenCschwab@gmail.com. Happy to do that. We don't have school lesson plans on this in this website. That exceeded the scope of what we were trying to put together. Would love to collaborate with somebody on something if they thought that there was a way to do that. And I think you could stage it, right? You could talk about, let's be literate in how we look at historical newspapers. That could be a whole lesson. So would love to get into
This
that.
community that we're visiting with and recording this for is a great community to engage.
Fabulous.
We have about
Reach out.
20.
Can I say one more thing about this? And
Yes.
this is just the one other newspaper thing I want to. It's really important to think about who is the source of it being used in the story. So as you're reading this, who said this? Does the paper say who said this? Does the paper explain how it got this information? Because a key part of the McNeely story, Joe McNeely's story, is that newspapers, more than one, were reporting what happened and never attributing it. And what becomes clear when you recognize that they are not attributing this information, and you realize that they couldn't have been there. So whose version are they presenting as the truth? And it is the police version that they are presenting as the truth. And we don't need to say anything more about that than to say they are presenting the police's version as the truth without attribution. Is it okay to present something as the truth without attributing your sources? No. Should we tolerate that anywhere? No. That is an academic truth. We don't tolerate being told something is the truth or being told something without telling me who said that. So I think that is just a part of citizen literacy, right? Who's saying it?
Yep.
What's their thing? That is just good stuff to get into. And again, these are all just really good critical thinking exercises for students that can work on any level, any level. Elementary school can think about that. Well, who said this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Media literacy is citizenship, all of that. We have 20 minutes left, and here's what I'd like to do. I've got a question for Krista, but then I've created 4 breakout rooms, and I'm going to invite you all to be able to interact with each other. There's a lot here, and I think it would be just a big omission on our part not to provide that opportunity. And like Helen said, following up on this is absolutely what I hope will happen, not only with the materials that are on the website now, but with other ideas. So I'm going to give a question to Krista, and then I'm going to open up breakout rooms. Krista, this is question 4 from what we shared earlier. What's been the most surprising or powerful lesson you've learned through this work, either personally or being a part of this team?
So the one of the biggest lessons that I learned was what something that Helen shared was I always thought racial terror lynchings were just hangings. I thought lynchings were just hangings. I never realized that there could be mutilation, decapitation, all of these different things uh that relate to lynchings. And I think personally through the work of Helen and Gary and what they have discovered, um, just the importance of good journalism. I can't tell you how grateful I am for them to be collaborators on this work and teaching me and just a lot. I've just learned so much around that. And also just the even more importance about memorializing two men that were members of our community. I mean, they lived here, they worked here, they played here. And so that's really important to honor people, to honor people.
100%. Okay, well, to let you know what's going to happen, I'm going to click a button here that's going to open up breakout rooms, and I want to invite you all to share. We are going to pause the recording. The breakout rooms are not recorded. And while I know you can ask Krista and Helen some more questions, they'll only be in two of the rooms. I just really want to give an opportunity for anyone here to respond to this project, to this initiative, to these topics. So I'm going to go ahead and click open the rooms. You should
Can I
see.
can I say one quick thing, Wes, before you send us out?
You
Um,
can.
this project has a high school essay contest. And that essay contest is not necessarily writing about the lynchings. You can write, it's run by EJI, and you can write about a variety of justice issues. And I just would feel that that we were remiss if we did not say, get your students to look at this. EJI's got a thing to look at. We've got one coming up. We don't have a date yet, but this is great stuff. It's a great opportunity for kids to really wrestle with some of this stuff and for you to have a part of that. And you can win scholarship dollars. I forgot the most important thing. They give out money. Please do it.
That's right. Well, we will come back after about 10 minutes in breakout rooms to wrap up, and part of that will be next steps. So if you'll go ahead and click on your breakout room, we'll bring you back here in 10 minutes. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. As we wrap up here in our last few minutes, I want to give both Krista and Helen a chance to share anything that you heard or discussion that happened in your room, or maybe a question that came up. And then we just got a couple things to say about follow-ups, and then we're going to be done. So, Krista, what happened in your breakout room? Any questions you'd like to answer, or things you want to give voice to?
Well, it was wonderful being with the educators and just learning about the experiences that they've had. For example, her name just escapes me. Chandra.
Yes.
Chandra. Yeah, Chandra shared how she was recently in Birmingham and learned about a museum that's across from a park, and just the comparison and contrast of her learning about classrooms, the difference between a white classroom, the difference between a black classroom, the fact that even that the white classroom had a clock and the black classroom did not. So having those experiences and taking tons of photos that she could just sit with them and have them once she left that museum, and just thinking about that. And then also a wonderful discussion between the other educators in the room about I um, having an idea about how can they connect students from one area of the country to another area of the country, and seeing what those experiences would be like. That was great ideation of what could possibly be. Helen, you want to
Absolutely.
add? Okay.
Okay.
I've got nothing else. I'm so grateful that educators came to this. I hope you have lots of ideas on how you might use some of this, and just want to again say, if there's something I put in the chat, the EJI link, people are invited to start their own community remembrance projects. You can reach out through EJI, and they will guide you through that process. They'll tell you if you have something in your county, but just to jump into anything that allows your students, or that allows students that you work with, to think about what history they know and how they might look at that history differently, thinking about its sources, and get at how can they get at truth, I think is the work of education right now like it's never been.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, I want to share some recommended next steps, which really come right from the website. We can all sign the declaration of support to declare our support, not to publish our email addresses publicly, but our names, acknowledging this history and memorials for Joe McDaniel, or for Joe McNeely and William McDaniel. The student essay contest, which Helen mentioned, is available as well. We can host conversations about this. I want to encourage you to share this recorded webinar. As with all of our Media Ed Club webinars, we record these and we want others to connect. And I think some of the conversations that it sounds like we had in breakout rooms can continue. And so that networking, my email address is there on our Media Club website. We can make contact information for Helen and Krista and the project. You can find contact information on the project. Find and join others in your own network, in your own community who are doing similar work. When I heard this presentation a couple months ago, I immediately thought of this group and thought of the work that we do. So can we give a round of applause to Helen and Krista for speaking with us today? I want to thank all of you for taking the time for being here and encourage you to take the next step. We are living in challenging times, but when you study history, don't you realize there have been some very challenging times, and some things are coming around again, but there's ways we've moved forward, and we certainly have better communication tools and more robust communication tools today to help educate, to help share. We do not need to wait for a local school board or a local community or whatever to do something. Like, we can take the initiative. And so joining with Krista and Helen and the team members here, and then applying, I guess, our own creative passion and skills in the ways that we have been teaching critical thinking and media literacy, to students at a variety of different levels, whether that's in the library, in the classroom, in the community. There's lots of good work we have to do together. So thank you all so much for being here. Please share this resource, take it to the next level. Let us know what you do, and let's keep doing good work together.
Thank you again for the opportunity.